Greetings and welcome to Archaeological Towers for Halloween Week 2019. This week we're sure to have some fun. Maybe a scare here or there. And in amongst all of the various limbs and legs and information, perhaps a smidgen of education. But let us begin tonight with part one of a historical, archaeological Halloween tale. In previous Halloween weeks I have shared with you ancient or even classical Halloween stories, ghost stories from people who lived hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. But this evening I'm going to share with you a story by H.P. Lovecraft, that master of cosmic fiction, who wrote a little tale called The Nameless City in 1921. I adore this story, in part because of the atmosphere, but also because it is essentially a story about archaeology, and it is well worth your attention. So sit back, get comfortable, and listen well to this warning for any who are too curious in the field of archaeology. When I drew nigh the Nameless City, I knew it was accursed. I was travelling in a parched and terrible valley under the moon, and afar I saw it, protruding uncannily above the sands, as parts of a corpse may protrude from an ill-made grave. Fear spoke from the age-worn stones of this hoary survivor of the deluge, this great-grandmother of the eldest pyramid, and a viewless aura repelled me and bade me retreat from the antique sinister secrets that no man should see, and no man else had dared to see. Remote in the desert of Araby lies the Nameless City, crumbling and inarticulate, its low walls nearly hidden by the sands of uncounted ages. It must have been thus before the first stones of Memphis were laid, and while the bricks of Babylon were yet unbaked. There is no legend so old as to give it a name, or to recall that it was ever alive, but it is told of in whispers around the campfires and muttered about by the grandams in the tents of sheikhs, so that all the tribes shun it without wholly knowing why. It was of this place that Abdul al-Hazred, the mad poet, dreamt on the night before he sang his unexplained couplet. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die. And I should have known that the Arabs have good reason to shun the Nameless City, the city told of in strange tales, but seen by no living man. Yet I defied them and went into the untrodden waste with my camel. I alone have seen it, and that is why no other face bears such hideous lines of fear as mine. Why no other man shivers so horribly when the night winds rattle at the window. When I came upon it in the ghastly stillness of unending sleep, it looked at me chilly from the rays of the cold moon amidst the desert's heat, and as I returned its look I forgot my triumph at finding it, and stopped still with my camel to wait until dawn. For hours I waited, till the east grew grey, and the stars faded, and the grey turned to a roseal light edged with gold. I heard a moaning and saw a storm of sand stirring amongst the antique stones, though the sky was clear and the vast reaches of the desert still. Then, suddenly, above the desert's far rim came the blazing edge of the sun, seen through the tiny sandstorm which was now passing away. And, in my fevered state, I fancied that from some remote depth there came a crash of musical metal to hail the fiery disk, as Memnon hails it from the banks of the Nile. My ears rang and my imagination seethed as I led my camel slowly across the sand to that unvocal stone place, that place too old for Egypt and Meroe to remember, that place which I alone of living men had seen, the Nameless City. In and out, amongst the shapeless foundations of houses and places I wandered, finding never a carving or an inscription to tell of these men, if men they were at all, who built this city and dwelt therein so long ago. The antiquity of the spot was unwholesome, and I longed to encounter some sign or device to prove that the city was indeed fashioned by mankind. There were certain proportions and dimensions in the ruins which I did not like. I had taken with me many tools, and dug much within the walls of obliterated edifices, but progress was slow, and nothing significant was revealed. When night and the moon returned, I felt a chill wind, which brought new fear, and I did not dare remain in the city. And as I went outside the antique walls to sleep, a small, sighing sandstorm gathered behind me, blowing over the grey stones, though the moon was bright and most of the desert was still. I awakened just at dawn from a pageant of horrible dreams, my ears ringing as from some metallic peal. I saw the sun peering redly through the last gusts of a little sandstorm that hovered over the Nameless City, and marked the quietness of the rest of the landscape. Once more I ventured within those brooding ruins that swelled beneath the sand like an ogre under a coverlet, and began digging vainly for relics of that forgotten race. At noon I rested, and in the afternoon I spent much time tracing the walls and the bygone streets and the outlines of the nearly vanished buildings. I saw that the Nameless City had been mighty indeed, and wondered at the sources of its greatness. To myself I pictured all the splendors of an age so distant that Chaldea could not recall it, and thought of Sarnath the Doomed that stirred in the land of Nar when mankind was young, and of Ib that was carven in the grey stone before mankind even existed. All at once I came upon a place where the bedrock rose stark through the sand and formed a low cliff, and here I saw with joy what seemed to be a promise of further traces of antediluvian people. Hewn rudely in the face of the cliff were unmistakable facades of several small, squat rock houses or temples, whose interiors might preserve many secrets of ages too remote for calculation, though sandstorms had long since effaced any carvings which may have been outside. Very low and sand-choked were all the dark apertures near me, but I cleared out with my spade and crawled through it, carrying a torch to reveal whatever mysteries were within. When I was inside, I saw that the cavern was indeed a temple, and beheld plain signs of the race that might have lived and worshipped before the desert was a desert. Primitive altars, pillars, and niches, all curiously low, were not absent, and though I saw no sculptures nor frescoes, there were many singular stones clearly shaped into symbols by artificial means. The lowness of the chiseled chamber was very strange, for I could hardly more than kneel upright. But the area was so great that my torch shewed only part of it at a time. I shuddered oddly in some of the far corners, for certain altars and stones suggested forgotten rites of terrible, revolting, and inexplicable nature, and made me wonder what manner of men could have made or frequented such a temple. When I had seen all that the place contained, I crawled out again, avid to find what the temples might yield. Night had now approached, yet the tangible things I had seen made curiosity stronger than fear, so I did not flee from the long moon-cast shadows that had daunted me when I first saw the Nameless City. In the twilight I cleared another aperture, and with a new torch crawled into it, finding more vague stones and symbols, though nothing was more definitive than the other temple had contained. The room was just as low, but much less broad, ending in a very narrow passage, crowded with obscure and cryptical shrines. About these shrines I was prying when the noise of a wind and my camel outside broke through the stillness and drew me forth to see what could have frightened the beast. The moon was gleaming vividly over the primeval ruins, lighting a dense cloud of sand that seemed to have been blown by a strong but decreasing wind from some point along the cliff ahead of me. I knew it was this chilly, sandy wind which had disturbed the camel, and I was about to lead him to a place of better shelter when I chanced a glance up and saw that there was no wind atop the cliff. This astonished me and made me fearful again. But I immediately recalled the sudden local winds I had seen and heard before and at sunrise and sunset, and judged it to be a normal phenomenon. I decided that it came from a source of rock fissure leading to a cave, and watched the troubled sand to trace it to its source, soon perceiving that it came from the black orifice of a temple a long distance south of me, almost out of sight. Against the choking sand cloud I plodded towards this temple, which, as I neared it, loomed larger than the rest and shewed a doorway far less clogged with caked sand. I would have entered, had not the terrific force of the icy wind almost quenched my torch. It poured madly out of the dark door, sighing uncannily as it ruffled the sand and spread among the weird ruins. Soon it grew fainter, and the sand more and more still, till finally all was at rest again. But a presence seemed to stalk amongst the spectral stones of the city, and when I glanced at the moon it seemed to quiver as though in unquieted waters. I was more afraid than I could explain, but not enough to dull my thirst for wonder. So, as soon as the wind was quite gone, I crossed into the dark chamber from which it had come. This temple was, as I had fancied from the outside, larger than either of those I had visited before, and was presumably a natural cavern, since it bore winds from some region beyond. Here I could stand quite upright, but saw that the stones and altars were as low as those in the other temples. On the walls and the roof I beheld for the first time some traces of pictorial art of the ancient race, curious curling streaks of paint that had almost faded or crumbled away, and on one or two altars I saw with rising excitement a maze of well-fashioned, curvilinear carvings. As I held my torch aloft, it seemed to me that the shape of the roof was too regular to be natural, and I wondered what the prehistoric cutters of stone had first worked upon. Their engineering skills must have been vast. Then a brighter flare of the fantastic flame shewed me that for which I had been seeking, the opening to those more remoter abysses whence the sudden wind had blown, and I grew faint when I saw that it was a small and plainly artificial door, chiselled into the solid rock. I thrust my torch within, beholding a black tunnel with a roof arching low over a rough flight of very small, numerous, and steeply descending steps. I shall always see those steps in my dreams, for I came to learn just what they meant. At the time I hardly knew whether to call them steps or mere footholds in a precipitous descent. My mind was whirling with mad thoughts, and the words and warning of Arab prophets seemed to float across the desert from the lands that men know to the nameless city that men dare not know. Yet I hesitated only for a moment before advancing through the portal and commencing a climb cautiously down the steep passage, feet first, as though on a ladder. It is only in the terrible phantasm of drugs or delirium that any other man can have such a descent as mine. The narrow passage led infinitely down like some hideous haunted well, and the torch I held above my head could not light the unknown depths toward which I was crawling. I lost track of the hours and forgot to consult my watch, though I was frightened when I thought of the distance I must be traversing. There were changes of direction and of steepness, and once I came to a long, low, level passage, where I had to wriggle feet first along the rocky floor, holding my torch at arm's length beyond my head. The place was not high enough for kneeling. After that we were more of the steep steps, and I was still scrambling down interminably when my failing torch finally died out. I do not think I noticed it at the time, for when I did notice, I was still holding it high above me, as if it were ablaze. I was quite unbalanced with that instinct, for the strange and the unknown which had made me wonder upon the earth and haunter of far and ancient and forbidden places. In the darkness there flashed before my mind fragments of my cherished treasury of demonic lore. Sentences from Alhazred the Mad Arab, paragraphs from the apocryphal nightmares of Damascus, and the infamous lines from the delirious image of Du Monde of Gauthier de Metz. I repeated queer extracts and muttered of Afrasiab, the demons that floated down with him along the Oxus. Later, chanting over and over again a phrase from one of Lord Dunsany's tales, the unreverberated blackness of the abyss, the unreverberated blackness of the abyss, the unreverberated blackness of the abyss. Once, when the descent grew amazingly steep, I recited something in sing-song from Thomas More until I feared to recite more. A reservoir of darkness, black, as witches' cauldrons are when filled, with moon drugs in the eclipse distilled, leaning to look in foot, might pass down through that chasm I saw beneath, as far as vision could explore, the jetty sides as smooth as glass, looking as if just varnished o'er. With that dark pitch the seat of death throws out upon its slimy shore. Time had quite ceased to exist when my feet again felt a level floor. I found myself in a place slightly higher than the rooms in the two smaller temples, now so incalculably far above my head. I could not quite stand, but could kneel upright, and in the dark I shuffled and crept hither and thither at random. I soon knew that I was in a narrow passage whose walls were lined with cases of wood having glass fronts. As in the Paleozoic and abysmal place I felt of such things as polished wood and glass, I shuddered at the possible implications. These cases were apparently ranged along each side of the passage at regular intervals, and were oblong and horizontal, hideously like coffins in shape and size. When I tried to move 2 or 3 of them for further examination, I found that they were firmly fastened to the ground. I saw that the passage was a long one, so floundered ahead rapidly in a creeping run that would have seemed horrible had an eye watched me in the blackness. Crossing from side to side, occasionally I could feel my surroundings to be sure the walls and rows of cases stretched on with me. Man is so used to thinking visually that I almost forgot the darkness and pictured the endless corridor of wood and glass in its low, studded monotony as though I saw it. And then, in a moment of indescribable emotion, I did see it. Just when my fancy merged into real sight I cannot tell, but there came a gradual glow ahead, and all at once I knew that I saw the dim outlines of a corridor, and the cases revealed by some unknown subterranean phosphorescence. For a little while all was exactly as I had imagined it, since the glow was very faint. But as I mechanically kept on stumbling ahead into the stronger light, I realized that my fancy had been but feeble. This hall was no relic of crudity, like the temples in the city above, but a monument of the most magnificent and exotic art. Rich, vivid, and daringly fantastic designs and pictures formed a continuous scheme of mural, painting, whose lines and colours were beyond description. The cases were a strange golden wood, with fronts of exquisite glass, and containing the mummified forms of creatures, outreaching in grotesqueness the most chaotic dreams of man. And so, part 1 comes to an end. Hopefully you have enjoyed that as much as I have. Later this week we will return to the Nameless City and see where our hapless and fatally curious adventurer ends up. Until then, do take care and enjoy this Halloween week. Bye-bye.